Good afternoon, everybody on the webinar out there in the webinar cloud. Today's topic is very interesting. We're going to talk about how to govern scaled Agile or enterprise Agile in a way that will allow IT governance to play a role in Agile, but it won't slow down the Agile delivery process. So this is a very interesting topic. And we think we've got some really neat innovations to address what continues to be a problematic space for most organizations. The agenda, of course, is housekeeping, which we've done, introduction, some common scaled Agile challenges we've seen. We'll start to talk about iron triangles of governance and how those impact or hurt the ability to execute Agile delivery in an organization. We'll then start to introduce a new framework that's predicated on our concepts of event-driven governance. We'll go into the design principles, some new artifacts and processes that you should consider, and then we'll establish some things to consider doing tomorrow to begin to implement this style of framework. Again, housekeeping items, Q&A at the end. You'll receive the webinar link so you can forward that around your organization for people to hear the live replay. And you'll receive the e-book, which is a 26-page white paper that describes in great detail the approach that we're covering in the slides. So introduction, what you all have seen and what we have seen is that enterprise Agile, scaled Agile adoption is increasing in industry. For a long time I thought, well, Agile is kind of a mature idea and people are doing it. But scaled Agile or enterprise Agile, we'll use those terms interchangeably, is definitely picking up pace recently. This resurgence is based on new technologies like social, mobile, and the ability to quickly create new apps, new capabilities, new solutions based on these new technologies. It's also based on the realization that the old waterfall methodologies just cannot deliver at the pace of change, at the pace of business to meet today's time-to-market requirements. Another phenomenon is that the adoption of Agile, we've seen this happening recently, is being driven by the business and not so much by IT. And that's a new development where the business decides to adopt an Agile methodology for a business program, and then they bring IT into the Agile party, and that IT has to get caught up. So when business is driving Agile, the chances of success are quite interesting and obviously have a better probability of success. Also, a lot of organizations are piloting Agile on key projects, and yet they're still struggling with the adoption. That has to do with two factors, at least two, one of which is the relative maturity of Agile knowledge and disciplines in a given enterprise. The other has to do with selecting what projects to apply Agile to in the first place. We have seen organizations apply scaled Agile to a configured commercial app, for example, which may or may not be the best use case for starting out with Agile. So Agile is increasing. There are challenges with it. Some of the challenges that we've seen to continue are aligning various SDLC patterns to the projects and the programs that you're launching. So not every project is a good fit or a best fit for Agile or scaled Agile, for example. There's also challenges in this scaled Agile domain of how do you surge the resources in the multiple Agile teams that are delivering different pieces of a large project or a large program. And more importantly, once you can surge the resources in, how do you coordinate across those Agile teams that may be within one program or across multiple programs in a large enterprise? Those are challenging issues. And then a very pesky one is, of course, coordinating the Agile delivery process in the Agile teams with existing non-Agile processes, shared services, organizations, and other things. So scaled Agile, enterprise Agile is accelerating, but the challenges are there. What we'll do today is introduce a framework that we feel will absolutely allow scaled Agile governance, so you get the benefits of IT governance and oversight, but you get you avoid the missteps of slowing down Agile delivery. So this framework is going to involve the things that I'm showing here. First and foremost, is the concept of event-driven governance and applying some of those principles to Agile governance. We'll introduce an organizational design that we call the Agile Governance Buffer Zone, and that's a way by which we can protect Agile teams from getting bogged down in IT governance problems. We'll introduce a process called the Agile Governance Lifecycle. We'll introduce an artifact called the Governance Backlog, and we'll create a new role, the whole idea of an Agile governance owner to facilitate governance activities on behalf of the Agile delivery process. And then we'll introduce the whole model of Agile pre-governance and how that can work. That's what we'll cover today, and I think you'll find it quite compelling. So there's some common touch points for scaled Agile in an enterprise. These are governance touch points that we see primarily. First and foremost is strategic planning, followed by the investment planning and budgeting activities. So that decides what IT is going to do to align to the business and support the business, how much funding and resources are going to be applied to different initiatives, projects, and programs. And then you get into deciding which of those projects and programs should be delivered using Agile. That happens through a PMO process in most places. That's listed down below. There's also the portfolio management and product management touch points, depending on what the organization does. There's the enterprise architecture touch point that is also very important in delivering projects and programs across the organization. And lastly, the resource management function. Again, that deals with how you surge the right resources into the Agile delivery model and then manage the interactions of those resources with the other non-Agile resources. So there's some other governance touch points, but these are the ones most central that we see when you're scaling up Agile in an enterprise. This picture that I'm showing is a way to think about IT governance in a large organization. I'm describing it as two iron triangles of governance. On the left is more of the project-centric governance that deals primarily with enterprise architecture, the project management office or the PMO, and the portfolio management function. So those three things kind of work together to drive project compliance to those higher level IT governance requirements. So that's one iron triangle of IT governance. On the right is the compliance-centric governance processes around risk and compliance, and those are very often siloed away from the project-centric governance processes in the IT governance function. But yet they're equally an iron triangle that you've got to navigate as you go through IT governance processes. What joins those two triangles together is the broad discipline of security. So when you've got the security thread tying those two together, that impacts every project, whether you're delivering via waterfall, iterative, Scrum, or what have you. So now imagine if you're an Agile team and a Scrum Master and a product owner and you're doing your business, and then you've got to go through some form of IT governance. You have to navigate these two iron triangles plus the security thread that binds them together, and that can become quite challenging for one Agile team to manage, not to mention multiples, and again, doing so in a way that is not going to slow down the Agile delivery sprint, which of course is 2 to 4 weeks long. So this picture shows those IT governance, the project-centric governance requirements. This picture shows those compliance and risk, compliance-centric governance processes that these Agile teams would have to navigate. And then this picture shows how navigating those uncertainties can be confusing, it can be complex, just the process and organizational navigation involved. It certainly introduces friction. It certainly has the potential for delays of the sprints being able to do what they committed to do. So these two iron triangles of IT governance are a challenge. So what kind of characterizes these iron triangles is the fact that there are decision-making challenges there. They're slow. It's ambiguous who makes the right decision or who makes the decision at all. We find that these mechanisms are not aligned with the velocity and operating tempo of Agile delivery. From an Agile team or any project perspective, governance is viewed as more of a compliance risk mitigation thing as opposed to something that will help a project be successful. so there's kind of a misalignment of what governance is there to do, and a misperception at times. So what will happen is the Agile teams will end up trying to avoid going through IT governance because their perception is it'll inhibit their sprint success. Again, that's primarily because these Agile teams work at a tempo that is much faster than the normal decision-making cycle of IT governance. In a lot of places, the governance meetings, for example, convene once a month or every 2 weeks at the fastest. But if you have to wait 2 weeks for a governance decision in a 2-week sprint, you will know the answer. The answer is it's not going to be fast enough to meet the needs of that particular sprint. So we've got to fix that. So the answer in our view is to build a bridge from enterprise governance to scaled Agile, and that bridge is through a paradigm that we call event-driven governance. Now, those of you that are new to AgilePath, you'll see in our website a white paper that is named the Lean Governance Manifesto. In that Lean Governance Manifesto is explained the principles and the mechanisms by which you can invent an event-driven governance framework for your organization. But I'll recap it here. The details are in the white paper and the recorded webinar that's on the event-driven governance framework. Very simple. Event-driven governance is based on a very simple premise that any governance model or any subset of governance should be implemented in a virtual way using triggers to bring the governance model into action, make its decision, and then go away. So this whole idea is based on a virtual governance model without permanent boards, but with good processes defined so that the events trigger the right process, get the governance decision made, and then go away. So the whole idea around event-driven governance is on a lightweight, virtual design that's only invoked when necessary governance events trigger these predefined governance processes and policy enforcement mechanisms. So in our view, this event-driven governance paradigm is the best fit for enabling IT governance for scaled Agile. And the principles of event-driven governance, in fact, are very consistent with the tenets of Agile methodology. So this is a definition that's more pure, straight out of the white paper. Again, event-driven governance is a governance design philosophy that ensures an effective governance model that drives enterprise performance and strategic execution while avoiding the layers of overhead and organizational complexity. So again, it's all about predefined triggers that bring a virtual design into action, and then it goes dormant and waits to do its next governing function. So it's lightweight, lean, but bolstered and supported by explicit policies that are critical. And it's also enabled by trust-based governance called self-governance and community governance mechanisms. So the purpose of using the event-driven paradigm for this scaled Agile governance is that we can implement an organizational model that's based on these principles that'll protect the Agile delivery teams from the slowness and friction and rigidness that typifies most IT governance models. We can implement exception handling and escalation processes such that the Agile teams can streamline their decision making or get the appropriate action from the enterprise governance process in a way that meets their needs, again, without slowing them down. And it'll enable this rapid resolution and escalation of any governance concerns following this approach. So the way to do it is to implement what we call an Agile governance buffer zone that protects the Agile delivery process from slow IT governance. The Agile governance buffer zone is illustrated here. It's in the green horizontal box that is the insulating layer between those sprint teams at the bottom and the two iron triangles of IT governance at the top. So that Agile governance buffer zone is actually an organizational design that creates this governance agility. It's implemented using event-driven concepts. And again, this process layer shields those Agile teams from the slowness of IT governance. It's a virtual organizational design that really, when we unpack it in the next slide, is composed of 3 layers of governance. At the bottom, there's a self-governance layer. the self-governance paradigm is implemented at the Agile team, the sprint team layer. And what you're essentially doing is allowing, empowering, trusting these governance teams to make the appropriate governance decisions for what they're empowered to do in a way that meets the speed of delivery within the sprint, 2 to 4 weeks. So the self-governance concept becomes a very important part of implementing event-driven governance, and you have to understand what policies, what enterprise governance requirements can be suitably delivered and met through a self-governing trust but verify model. The next layer above the self-governance layer is the community governance layer. Now, community governance is essentially an empowered team of people that are trusted to know what the governance requirements are of the enterprise. And this community governance team is the mechanism that will govern across all those Agile teams and help mediate governance decisions up to the enterprise, but yet is empowered in and of its own right to make governance decisions that will allow the Agile delivery process, again, to meet its speed objectives, but yet it will also be able to make some higher level, more strategic governance decisions by virtue of it being a higher level organizational model. Above the community governance layer is the traditional enterprise IT governance, and that's the traditional enterprise IT governance framework, and I'm going to the text that supports that graphic. That's where the top-down prescriptive governance stuff that we're all accustomed to takes place. That's risk and compliance, and that's any other top-down prescriptions for enterprise architecture, for security, for portfolio management, and so on and so forth. So what we're essentially saying is, with this three-tiered buffer zone of self-governance, community governance, coupled with the enterprise top-down side, that will give Agile teams the ability to self-govern and community govern, which will be much faster, and yet have mechanisms to engage with the enterprise IT governance processes for the things that they need to. So this is all contained in that Agile governance buffer zone, again, whose sole purpose is to insulate the Agile teams from the slowness of decision-making that characterizes the enterprise IT governance model. I hope that's clear as I bounce around with the slides. So this picture here actually shows the self-governance happening within the sprint team at the bottom. It shows the community governance team, which again is a single team of 8 to 10 people, 7 plus or minus 2 maybe, but its job is to govern across all those Agile teams and coordinate governance decisions across multiple programs. And the community governance construct, of course, has a pipeline into the enterprise to not only get support and approval for its governance decisions, but for things that do need to come out of the top-down prescriptive model, they can get those decisions accelerated. So this is what it would look like.